Hello and welcome to the Leg Roundtable. This will be a series of discussions held with members and leaders of the 218th Field Artillery Battalion. Our goal for this series is to share the story of our organization and pull back the curtain to help folks understand who we are and what we do. The National Guard is a unique team to play for. Our members are constantly balancing providing service to their communities as well as living their day-to-day lives. In today's discussion, I'm joined by our battalion command team, where we cover what their first days in the Guard look like and what advice they have for new soldiers. We'd love to hear your feedback and what you'd like to hear on this series, so please reach out on Instagram at Oregon_Artillery or find us on Facebook at 2nd Battalion 218th Field Artillery. We hope you enjoy the show. Good afternoon, Red Lakes and Jungleers. Thanks for joining us today. Today I am joined by Lieutenant Colonel Manuel Robledo.
Hello.
I have Major James Ellifrit.
Hello.
And I have Command Sergeant Major Daniel Dougal.
Evening, sir.
All right. So today, we're going into a new and challenging training year, and we want to talk about, as an organization, and take the time to talk about the experiences that people have within the organization. It's important to remember that this is made up of people to our left and to our right, and it's not just boxes and lines. No matter the situation, ultimately no one wants to go to war with their coworkers. People want to go to war with their friends. And building relationships, especially if you're new to an organization like this, it can be really intimidating when you first see it. Can be really difficult. So a lot of our conversation today is going to be primarily focused around what those challenges look like, especially if you're new, and just try and bring some light to that. These are challenges that all of us has faced as we've started to grow into the organization and sort of learn more about. It takes a proactive effort from people to make this place their home, but it's not a hard effort, and it should be relatively simple to be able to make that happen. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the question for you, Colonel Robledo, first. I'd love to hear about your very first drill with the 218th.
My very first drill, 218th. Yep. So I was a freshman in college, and was, I had always known for a long time that I was going to serve. And when I initially joined, it was underneath the simultaneous membership program. So plan was, potentially go ROTC and then, drill with a unit to kind of get familiar. However, changed and just said, hey, I'm going to join the National Guard just to get the experience out of the gate. And so I approached the recruiter. I was like the recruiter's dream, like, yes, got one. Didn't have to sell anything. Signed me up as a 13 Fox, which is a forward observer. For many reasons, it appealed to me. And then my unit at the time, we had our Detachment 1 of HHB, Higher Headquarters Battery, out at Hood River, Oregon. Mm-hmm. So it was, God, I can't even remember when I actually showed up at the unit. I think it was prior to going to basic training. It was my first, when you say the first time arriving at the unit. And I can tell you that the only thing I can really just remember is walking in, and at the time it was Staff Sergeant Benjamin Hall was the readiness NCO.
Okay.
So he was the guy that was responsible to do the paperwork, make sure all the processing, all the things, all the administrative requirements were really taken care of and tracked and getting me ready to go to school. But I'll tell you, that initial interaction, just his presence and his welcoming, attitude, just totally set the scene for me. It just connected, I immediately felt like I was a part of a team, just accepted as who I was. There was nothing about, where I'd come from or what my experience was or anything. It was just I was immediately accepted.
Was that the Sergeant Ben Hall back then, or was that before him?
No, that was Sergeant Hall.
That was Hall?
Ben Hall.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. He was a staple of the Hood River area for a long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, having that initial experience, though, just having that initial, welcome, you're one of us now, and, I'm going to take care of you. Following through on some of those things, it was pretty impactful. Like, I can't tell you much more than just...
Mm-hmm. But you remember how that felt?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. How about you, Sergeant Major?
Well, sir, my experience was a lot different because I didn't initially grow up in the Guard in the 218th. I came after the promotion to Command Sergeant Major. So, but it was a very welcoming experience, and it was very refreshing to come back to an environment that I had not been a part of for so long. Starting my military career off active duty as a 13 Bravo and spending 4.5 years in active Army and then coming into the Guard and finding my way as a maintainer and supporting cav and infantry units. And the opportunity to come back to this environment was literally like Christmas. It was the best thing ever. And I'm very blessed and very privileged to come to such a good organization with a lot of good people.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be really challenging, especially in a position of leadership, to be jumping into this sort of brand new position with brand new people. And how did you navigate that? How did you, if you think of the position of like a soldier who comes in through an IST, right? So they're already an experienced soldier. They've already done things before, but they've never done it with these people before. What was that experience like, especially as a leader?
That was that dining in drill too, wasn't it? On the drill floor there?
The first weekend with the battalion, it was an official drill. I was still part of 186 in Southern Oregon, but they were very welcoming, like I said. But I knew a few people, but I did, what I did before, being an outsider going into the infantry battalion. I went around and talked to people. I mingled. I introduced myself. I tried to learn as much as I could about as many people as I could to make those connections. Because one thing I've learned over the several years is it's a big organization, but it's a small organization. You typically run into people that you have connections with through other people and other experiences. So it's good.
Absolutely. How about you, Major Elfrit?
Well, like the commander, I started out as a 13 Fox. I was not in the Hood though. That was our old nickname for the Hood River Det.
That's right.
I was with HHSB proper there at the Jackson Armory when we had everyone other than the Hood River Det. Everybody else in the battalion was there at Jackson. So we had a headquarters battery, consisted of the old maintenance motor platoon, the mess platoon, the fire support element for the brigade, plus the 3 battalions. And then we had the staff and the medics. It was 2 weeks after I turned 17. My father was the battalion XO.
Yep.
Funny how things work out, huh? And I was a PV1 when I enlisted, still in high school. And back then we didn't have the RSP program. Like the commander said, you reported to your unit on your first drill. You wouldn't have a uniform because you hadn't shipped to basic training yet. And you would meet your readiness NCO. My readiness NCO was Sergeant First Class High Speed Cornelius Curtis. He was amazing. Much like Sergeant Ben Hall, he was just very welcoming. But he had that aura about him of like that professional, what we would call like an old school classic senior non-commissioned officer. He joined the Army in the 80s, early 80s. His uniform was always to the nines, just pressed He had the gig line creases, the black polished boots. He had a gold tooth, chiclet right in the front, and so he always smiled. So when he would smile, like that's what you would see is like the,
This gold tooth.
yes,
just,
and
just
the light
reflecting.
reflect off of it, and he had this, hey there, high speed is how he talked, just a class act great guy. He cared, genuinely deeply cared about soldiers. And so I showed up there, and I was brought in the week prior to drill and basically filled out a personnel packet with them, contact information. There was no cell phones back then, so it was your home phones. This is my mom and dad's phone number. I was a kid in high school. Drove. I think I got dropped off at the armory because I didn't have my own car yet, and that's how I am processed. And then my first drill weekend was that following weekend. We had what turned into the RSP program, but back then, the RTI, the old RTI on Western Oregon University's campus, where the old Oregon Military Institute was, we had a training program there that was like a pre-basic is what they would call it. And it was 1 to 3 drill weekends, a mute of 5, so a Friday night through Sunday. And you would go to your armory, hop on a bus, they would take you to Monmouth, Oregon, drop you off at the Oregon Military Academy. And there were M-Day NCOs that would wear brown rounds, and they would be a drill sergeant for the weekend, and you didn't know anything other than like what you like saw in a movie or read in a flyer. So it was very eye-opening, and it was interesting, So that was my first time having to stand in a line with other people, and the line had to be straight, and you couldn't talk, you couldn't fidget. And that was a drill weekend. It was interesting. So it was good experience. That readiness incident, Sergeant Cornelius Curtis, he set the tone, and that positive interaction with him really set the stage for years for me. And that, honestly, like in our battalion with our culture and the things we're always talking about, being a people-centered organization, like that care from him that I received in 1997 is something that I pride myself on, that we work very hard to continue doing that to this day, because it's not always that case,
Right, and folks like that have like a huge impact, and it's always interesting to see mentorships ultimately develop through people like that. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the first thing that you'll hear, both professionally and within the military as well, is when you get to a place, find a mentor and find the right mentor. And that can be a pretty intimidating prospect to be staring down the barrel of, especially if you're maybe not the most social person in the world, or you don't know who anyone is. I'd like to hear a little bit about some of the mentors that you guys have had, and how they made an impact, and how you actually went about finding these folks.
You want to go first, sir?
Oh, if you got one off the top of your head, go ahead. I'm just trying to think. Really, for me, it goes back to Sergeant Hall. He was the steady hand, the key presence all along through my time in the debt. I think, that, as I talked about, just the appreciation, that initial contact, that follow-up, that follow-through. I wouldn't say, it was like a full-on official mentor, but it's really the first role model, the first, leader to learn from about, how to do things right? Mm-hmm. And then, other mentors after that, kind of follow along. I think my peer group, and some that were close by. You know, is now Colonel Maurice Marshall, just retired Lieutenant Colonel Jason Marshall. It was a weird time because, frankly, I wouldn't say that they were all great leaders at the time that I joined, right? And so I think for whatever reason, the few years prior to the 2001 event,
9/11,
right?
yeah.
We just had this really, I think, in hindsight, dynamic group of officers that all joined at the same time.
It was a distinct separation in the kind of history of the organization, right?
Right, and so there
yeah.
wasn't a big group of officers like above us. There were definitely a few. The Bill Hagedorns, the Steve Schmitz of the world, and those were definitely turned into mentors. But I'll be frank, I was so new and young. I didn't.
We didn't talk to them, right?
Yeah,
they were captains. You're like, oh man, I'm a private.
Yeah, those guys were.
Can't talk to them.
I mean, they were echelons above us.
Yeah.
So initially, it was just I had a really unique, a pretty incredible peer group that we relied on to learn from, and I think that goes back to our current culture of really relying on our left and right, batteries, the formations around us that we could talk to and get experiences from, throw ideas back and forth, commiserate with.
Yeah, absolutely. What about some of those folks made them good mentors or made them good partners through the experience?
So it's and even in later in life, right? I would say good mentors. One, it starts with the non-judgmental aspect of things, right? Just the willingness to listen and to encourage, and help provide some guidance. Help provide some options. Especially when you're in tough spots. Just knowing that there were those individuals, officers and NCOs that would take the time to really kind of hear you out. I think what's really important for the audience, especially, the field artillery in Oregon is such a small community, right? It's one battalion. It's not the largest battalion. It's like probably...
We're in the middle of the pack in size.
Right, and so, every unit, has some similar unique characteristics, suppliers, maintainers, logisticians, right, infantry guys, but artillery is unique. The skill sets that we need to go through, the training, the requirements.
There's nobody else.
Right.
It's just us.
Right. And so having that close knit group that kind of understands and you can kind of feels the pain and you feel like you can really gravitate towards was extremely important. And again, I think what also made it really unique for us in the Guard is, a lot of these officers had, I think, really successful, I don't know if I want to say successful, they had other life commitments that they had to go through, right? They had families on the outside world, they had jobs, that they were dedicated towards, had all these other competing requirements that were extremely important, and sometimes were higher priority than the Guard. So having that perspective, being able to see the trials and tribulations that they had to go through, but yet still serve, and then still take time to provide guidance and provide mentorship. I think were all those key aspects of what made them so great as far as developing me anyway.
Yeah. Sergeant Major, you especially have been in a position where you've been to a lot of different organizations as well as having spent some time on active duty. What was that process of finding the right cart or the right horse to hitch your cart to, right?
Yeah, it's a tough one, thinking back earlier in my career up until the last few years, to really pinpoint, who, helped guide me, or who I picked up pieces of advice from, but in more recent years, I guess the one that sticks out the most was Lieutenant Colonel Dyer. We got to serve with him on the deployment to Djibouti, Africa in 2019 to 2020, and just seeing how he is, genuinely cared and took care of the needs of people. Right? You could genuinely see that that was on the forefront of his mind, and everybody around the other leaders, like you can see how people really enjoy working with him, and so it's left a lasting impact on me, just the way he was. But like I said, it's kind of really hard to pinpoint some of the others.
Right, and finding a mentor can sometimes happen organically, and sometimes it has to be something you deliberately take the action to find out. I think a lot of folks, probably their first mentor in the organization is their chief, right? But, your mentor is not necessarily always going to end up being your boss. So, Major Ellifrit, anyone stick out?
A number of people. I had a pretty unique experience with the first team that I was a part of. Was a very negative and counterproductive team, and I didn't know at the time. I was young and immature, but it was fun, and so my chief, like you said, a lot of times that's your first person that you consider a mentor, because that's your first line leader, right? And it took me a while to figure out that person was not the right kind of mentor to have. So, fast forward to really the mentoring that I was actively seeking out and engaging with people on happened during OIF2. We were mobilized from 2003 to 2005, and that's where I could now retired Lieutenant Colonel Jason Marshall. He was a lieutenant back then that I really looked up to, and he still to this day is a mentor of mine, and been instrumental in my development as a NCO years ago. And make no mistake, mentoring does not always mean they're telling you the nice things that you think you want to hear. Being truthful and honest with you to help grow you and shape you to achieve the potential that they see in you, but you may not see in yourself, or are kind of afraid to pursue. Because maybe that requires some changes. That was the issue for me. I was a little nervous about making some changes because it required some big changes, and he helped me with that. I would say Eric Riley. Then in OF2, he was my company commander downrange. He's a general officer now here in the Oregon Guard. He really, I learned from him, because he's a traditional M-Day officer his entire career, and I think one of the biggest things I learned from him was the humanity of being an organizational leader in the military, and understand the humanity of people and the unique things that every one of them brings to the table, and there's different circumstances in life that impact everybody a different way. He was always able to get people, organizations, to lead them in a way that they could do impressive things, hard things, but he never did it by being a strong-handed, authoritarian style leader.
Right.
And that was kind of unique, because in the artillery, honestly, like a lot of our battalion commanders for years, like that's kind of like what you had to have the swagger, almost like a, you know, like you're like the Cav and armor swagger kind of thing,
Absolutely,
like
yeah.
that type of style. A little more strong-handed and bold in how you ran things, and so that was very unique for me to see, you know, being in an environment like that. I'd say Colonel retired Steve Schmidt, you know, he's a mentor for sure. He's another artillery officer. He taught me like the power of people, you know, leveraging people power by being a good person and getting people to get on board with like a, you know, something together that they all believed in. And then Command Sergeant Major retired Brunk Conley. He was the former Command Sergeant Major of the Army National Guard, and CSM at every level of organization in our chain of command in Oregon. The first time I met him, he was a first sergeant in BCO 2162. And he, when I think of like the example NCO as a warrior, that's the guy. And honestly, like he is who taught, learning from him is, you know, was a formidable role model and mentor for me for many, many years.
For our young NCOs, what does that look like?
So what Sergeant Major Conley taught me is he was the expert in his CPMOS. He was an 11 Bravo. But he didn't lead by saying, do this because I know everything. He was what we call a selfless leader. You know, it was never about him. And so you felt comfortable coming to him and saying, you know, hey, can you kind of help me out with this thing? And he always,
I messed up.
he always knew how to fix it and how to do it right. And he was fantastic at building people up. And he was exceptionally great at being happy in hardship. I remember seeing him during an annual training in 2002, and he had this brutal sunburn. We were out here at Rylea. No, it was AT of 2003. We were here at Rylea, and the sun here can get pretty intense with the ocean air, and you can burn really easy. And it fried his face, and he had like open, blistered sores.
Gosh, yeah.
His nose was just, it was nasty. You look like one of these French Vienna sausages that's like left outside and you step on it a couple times. So, yeah, I run into him in BCO waiting in line at the IWQ range, and he's got the soldiers sitting under the shade under a tree, and he's standing in the sun, and he's talking to everybody, engaging the soldiers. You know, how you doing? And he's talking to, you know, people are, you know, eating their lookies and chewies while they got some downtime. So he's, you know, talking about like, you know, MRE food and cracking the jokes that we do about that stuff. And I'm looking at him, and like you can see like physically he's in pain, but when you heard his voice, the tone of his voice, and you watched his body language, it was like, you know, there was nothing going on, and he was all about motivating soldiers, and everybody was seeing him like, that has to hurt so bad. And he never once talked about it, never brought it up. He never made his discomfort anybody else's discomfort. You know, when I think of like the ideal NCO, I'm thinking of somebody like that, you know, that personal shared hardship. They lived it, they know it, they're there every day with that soldier. And that gives confidence to soldiers, because we all experience those things, right? You know, that discomfort. But that's that NCO leadership, like that expert, you know. And when I saw him as a CSM, in 2162 when I served with them in Iraq. Our battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel retired Daniel Hendrickson, he was a great commander, and we had a very, very hard mission. And the way that CSM Colony balanced him out, his personality out, by being the yin to his yang for the betterment of the organization through some extremely difficult times, I was like, okay, that's how this
what it
works.
looks like.
This is
Yeah.
what right looks like.
Right.
And honestly, like that's what I have focused on ever since. CSM, Lee Smith, the current CSL for Oregon, that's his model leadership. You know, same kind of thing. He was my first sergeant in Bravo Battery when I was a gun chief, and the same things that I saw in Sergeant Major Conley are the same type of leadership traits, and the way that he leads by, you know, sharing in hardship, and that brings that confidence to the organization and balances out commanders. So, you know, they as a team are the best for what the organization needs. You know,
He gives some really great speeches too. So.
Yes, he does. The St. Barbara's speech at 2022, I think, is going to go down in record books.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
All right, Colonel Robledo, I am a brand new private, and I just assessed into the Oregon Army National Guard. I finished up AIT, I finished up RSP, I finished up all my in-processing, and I showed up to my first actual drill. We're going to Rylea, and I don't know anyone, and sir, what do I do?
Well, you need to essentially look, you know, when you show up at formation, like literally, if that's your first thing, like I'm in formation and somebody puts me here, look at the end of the line, ideally maybe towards your right, and that should be a leader of some type, right? Like if you really don't know and you find yourself like I'm now at drill and I know what a formation is and I gotta stand here, but you don't know anybody, just look down the line. Last guy on that line is probably a leader, and talk to him like, hey, what do I do? What do you need? This is who I am. And that leader should, you know, get you aligned to where you need to go. Should help you.
I wish I had that advice when I was a private, because it would have made that first drill after being.
Did you look to the left instead?
No. So coming out of that pre-basic training program, I was like, I know I need to stand at the position of parade rest if I'm not moving, and I know I have to walk in straight lines, and someone will pick me up and tell me where I need to go.
Yep.
Well, no one picked me up and told me where to go, so I stood at the position of parade rest on the drill floor for hours until an officer came over and grabbed me.
Yeah.
I said, well, what are you doing? What unit do you belong to?
How can I help you?
Exactly.
Well, and I'll tell you, I was just gonna say, like, look, if you don't find yourself lucky enough to be in a formation to look down the line, yeah, someone will realize, someone will not recognize you, and someone will say you must be new. So, you know, don't be afraid to say, yep, I'm new. You know, where do I go? Ask for directions, and somebody will get you to the right spot. They'll get you to the locker. They'll get you to the readiness instill. They'll get you to your squad. You'll get you to your leader. You know, and ideally from there, you know, there shouldn't be any questions or issues, right?
Yeah.
So
That section chief, squad leader. That's the person that you got to find. 'Cause they're
for
the master of your destiny.
whatever reason, and if you show up late, again, just find an office and say, I'm supposed to be X, or I'm so and so. Somebody will get you there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask. Never be afraid just to ask. Like, what am I doing? Where am I?
All right, Major, for taking us home. I've now been in the unit for about a year. I've done an AT, and I know who the people are for the most part, and I kind of, for the most part, know what my job is. What next?
All right, so once you get through basic training in AIT, and then you go to your first annual training, you should have already learned how, like what the Army says, that for your MOS, this is what right looks like, this is how you do it. When you go to that AT with your unit, this is where you're going to see your unit SOPs in action, that unit culture in action, that leadership environment in action. You're like, okay, this is the way that our organization accomplishes these tasks, right? So now that you've experienced all that, you got a full cycle under your belt, now it's about paying into the organization, which includes yourself and others, right? So you have this knowledge, talking about asking questions, right? There are a lot of things that you have to learn by doing or picking other people's brains of, well, now you're some of that salt, and there's going to be new people coming in right behind you, and it's your responsibility now to pay back into the organization, and you need to be challenging yourself to not rest on your laurels and stay where you are, but to always be trying to move forward and be the best version of yourself, because when we are the best version of ourselves, then we are all the best of the organization together. That's how all this works.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of Leg Roundtable. Please find us on Facebook at 218th Field Artillery or on Instagram, where we have more posts and updates at Oregon Artillery. Thank you and have a great day.